Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today we are going to be ranking my favorite Critical Role boss battles. This is across all of Critical Roles, campaign 1, 2, 3, EXUs, miniseries, etc., etc. Mostly centered around Exandria, however, nothing leaves Exandria, so no like random live shows or one-shots or anything like that. And typically, most of these boss fights are going to be stuff that happens like at the end of an arc or with the major antagonist of said arc. So nothing like a halfway boss or a midway boss. These are all like real deal bosses, in my opinion. Some people might disagree, who knows. But overall, these are my favorite boss battles in Critical Role. Also, one last thing before we truly get into it. I don't think this needs to be said, but you never know with some people. Spoilers, obviously, for all three campaigns and some EXU stuff. Spoilers. At number 10, I have the fight at the Godhammer from EXU Downfall Episode 3. I think this fight is dope for a couple reasons. First of all, the win condition wasn't just to kill everybody that was at the Godhammer. It was also to, to break the wards surrounding it so they could regain their divinity back, which I thought was really cool because it is one of the few fights where as the fight progresses, they continuously get stronger. It's not like they just get one buff in the middle of a fight. They continuously get stronger as the fight goes on because they keep breaking these wards. I think it's super dope. Also, it was a really interesting showing of like how far people were willing to go to like rid the world of the gods to end the calamity, because there were like dragons here, like mages here, devils here, demons here. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they had to fight here while they were on the Godhammer. So it was a really good showing of like how desperate people were getting to end the conflict of calamity, which I thought was really cool and really interesting, because it showed that people weren't just constantly on the side of the gods or constantly on the side of this. People who were probably on either or at one point in time, like it was a brass dragon that was there. That's a good aligned dragon, and he was trying to, or they were trying to eliminate the gods. I think that's a very unique showing of like how a demon, a brass dragon, a handful of other entities can all be in the same place and fight against the idea of this massive never-ending war seemingly. And I think that was just a really cool showing of it. Not to mention the ending of it with the where he summons the meteors, where Salaha calls the meteors down to smash the Godhammer, is a really cool way and like neat foreshadowing or an inspiration for what Imogen would later do against Pathos, which I always think is really cool and really fun. And it inspired the ring that he created specifically for that moment to happen. So I think that was a really cool thing for us to see, that there was, this really fun boss fight, but then this boss fight influenced a later boss fight, which I think is really cool. Also, I'd be pretty foolish to neglect mentioning how cool this fucking battle map is. This thing spins, okay? This thing spins. Do I need to say any more? That's so cool. It spins. It's rad. It's badass. I love things like this where things spin. So cool. So at number 9, we now have the Bells Hells versus Pathos. Now, hang on. I know a lot of people are going to be against this idea of this being on this list. I personally really like this fight. I think this fight is a lot of fun. There is one blemish on it, which is why it's this low on the list, but overall, I think this fight's dope. First and foremost, there's multiple stages to it, which I think is badass. I love that idea. Everyone's stealing from Dark Souls. Might as well. They're a fantastic franchise. So having multiple phases to a boss fight is a dope move. I just love this idea, and the idea of like Pathos looking like a Rylora, and then eventually when it swallows Imogen, it starts to take on her appearance, which is really cool and really fun, because it just shows like the relationship between the Ruidusborn, the Rylori, and Pathos. I thought it was just a really fun like showing of what like the top race of the Ruidus moon was, and then how it relates to Pathos, and then how Imogen can affect Pathos, like how it has affected her throughout her life. I thought it was a really cool showing of that. And then of course they got a bit of a power up, and then they had to fight the second phase of it, which was like the massive head and the massive arms, was really cool. And for me, one of my favorite aspects of this fight was how I thought it was so impossibly stupid that Chetney had kept his hands on Turmoil the Scythe throughout the entire campaign, only for Turmoil to be extremely useful because it had the weakness to Pathos and thunder damage. I thought that was really awesome and really cool. First of all, just the fact that I made fun of Chetney the entire time for having this thing, and then it finally became useful, was infuriating and awesome all at the same time. And then again, the map was super cool. The map, the minis, everything about this fight was really dope and really badass. One of my favorite moments of this fight is when Imogen gets swallowed up and she goes inside of Pathos and is able to like absorb the remaining like essence of the last two gods Predathos had eaten. I thought that was really sick and really cool showing of what Predathos has done in the past. So for me, overall, really like this fight. There is a blemish on it, and everyone knows it. I don't think I need to talk about it too much, the whole mask situation. But overall, I think that can be, like, passed up, because this was, like, the grand payoff of all of Campaign 3. They were finally fighting Predathos. They were finally getting a little bit more answers, and more answers would come from this moment. So overall, badass fight, badass map, a ton of cool moments. Like, I love the, like, ingenuity of using the ring that Salaha made, like I mentioned before, to call down the meteors, and, you know, instead of it being meteors, it was like the big crystals that were being pulled down instead, because they were in like an enclosed space. Really cool idea. And then she changed it to thunder damage instead of fire damage because of one of her sorcerer abilities. That was so cool, in my opinion, to be able to notice a weakness of a villain and be like, I can change the spell to make it that. And she'd been doing it throughout the entire fight, but it was just really badass to me that she took this massive one and did it on that scale. And it was the way that she finished off Predathos. So the fact that Imogen finished off Predathos was just poetic as all hell. Overall, love this fight. It is so much fun. There is that blemish, but I don't care. At number 8, we have Vox Machina versus Umbrasyl. I think this fight is dope because it's spread out across a couple episodes, and it really shows the power of these ancient dragons that they have, right? And it was really cool because the first showing of the dragons were destroying all of Iman. They were just ripping through Iman and really, like, displaying how powerful they were. So when the party finally came up against one, they really needed to show the power of this thing, and Matt did an excellent job. They had the herd, you know, Grog's herd with them fighting against it. They had a trap. The trap went off, and he got trapped in it. He was able to break free of the trap and still fight off. And eventually, they forced him to retreat, but he was still alive. Like, this was a super fun fight because it was a bunch of people fighting this dragon who was still doing a decent job fighting against them. Yes, some people ended up entering his colon, but we'll ignore that for now. And then eventually, when he flew off, there was like an air portion of the fight between 3 people. Grog, who had clung to the outside, and then Scanlan and Vax, who were on the inside through his colon. And I just thought this was really fun. The idea that there was 3 stages to this fight, and I'll get to the last stage in a minute. But the idea that there was the first stage where they had like a bunch of help, and then there was the second stage where it was even less people, but they were still doing some damage. And part of that was to sort of be able to survive the fall that would inevitably happen. And a handful of unique ways happened to save them from falling, which was cool. And it was also a moment where Vax was finally like able to become the champion of the Raven Queen at this point. I think this is when he got his wings, which was really cool. So overall, like the first 2/3 of this fight is really fun. It's the last third where I think this shit gets even cooler, because there was a bit of a rest for everybody so they could fight him again, and then it became Vox Machina versus Umbrasyl, and it was really cool, and the setting's really dope. The map isn't quite what maps would become later on and like down the line for Critical Role, because this was still early Critical Role, but it was still really cool to see, like, and to envision this fight was really dope. Inside of a cave. You know, normally when you think of like a dragon fight, you don't want to be inside a cave. You want to be out in the open so the dragon can move around. But no, this one was inside a cave, and this was Umbrasyl's cave, his domain. He had the advantage. In the first half, or the first bit of the fight, the party had the advantage because they had the herd and the trap. In the second half, or the second bit of the fight, there was no advantage because Umbrasyl was trying to flee, and there was only 3 members of the party there. For the last bit of this fight, he had the advantage, and I thought that was really cool. It was in his place. He knew it the best. He was able to move around. It was his location, and the party still came out on top and was super, super badass, in my opinion. At number 7, I have the Mighty Nine versus the Angel of Iron's cult. I love the Angel of Iron's like entire like storyline with them kidnapping Yasha and Oban going around releasing powerful entities that could be used to fight against people. It was really dope, and it was all like under the guise of the Chained Oblivion, which was awesome. For me, this fight was one of the best like culminations of an arc ever. First and foremost, one of my favorite moments of the entirety of Campaign 2 is Caduceus saving Yasha from being mind-controlled, and then the stained glass behind her breaking as the Stormlord like shoots like lightning down into the ground, and she's able to scream like a primal rage scream to be able to like finally be like, I'm free of this bullshit. And then Caleb using his like flame web attack, or flame web spell, I forget what it's called, to like ignite the Laughing Hand after they eliminated its heart back in the Happy Time Fun Ball, was badass as hell. And then eventually they would follow Oban down even further into the church, where they would have to fight like his second incarnation of him, because he got like mutated because he was failing at this point, which was really badass. Because again, 2 stages to a boss fight is always a good move in my opinion. I love boss fights that have multiple stages. And of course, the best part about all of this is Matt's NPC, one of the people Oban had resurrected, was actually the one to kill it, or to kill Oban. So Matt got a, how do I want to do this? I think that's awesome. First of all, the maps were really cool. Again, I can't wait for the Yasha being freed from her mind control thing to be animated. That is going to be a moment that I think is going to like go down in animation history with how I envision it and how I know they're going to be able to pull it off. It's going to look so good, and I'm so excited for that because it's going to be dope. But overall, really fun fight. I love this fight. Also, I can't forget that this was, I think, the only time we ever saw Pumat's soul fight. And come on, that's awesome. Pumat's soul was here to fight. That's sick. At number 6, I have the Mighty Nine versus Avantika at Darktow. I think this fight is awesome because it doesn't end with the party killing the opposition. The whole point of this fight was for them to be able to get information about a potential coup coming from Avantika and her crew against the Plank King. And the whole idea was to get that information to him. I thought this was dope because, again, typically, the way you win a fight, or the way you win a boss fight in Dungeons & Dragons, is to just kill the person standing across from you. The idea that that wasn't the option here, because that would have probably ended up even worse for the party. In fact, it would have been worse, not probably, was awesome. The idea that they couldn't just kill the person standing in front of them, one, because they might be too weak to do it in the first place. She might have been too powerful for them to do it at the time. And 2, because it would have turned an entire party or an entire pirate cove against you. Best not to do that, especially when you're in the heart of the pirate cove and your ship isn't in the best place to just start taking off and leave. So what happens? Part of the party plays defense and sort of holds off Avantika and the rest of her, pirate crew. And the other part of the party, specifically Caleb and Bo, start moving as fast as they can to run up a hill to get to the top of Darktow so they can talk to the Plank King so he can come back down with the information in hand that she, Avantika, is trying to kill him and then snap her neck viciously. It was, first of all, a cathartic moment because she had been a mild pain in the ass for a while up to the party, specifically to Ford, my favorite character. So for her to finally get her comeuppance because she wanted to rule Darktow and she wanted to become the most powerful person and unleash Ukuto and all that stuff, for her to finally get her comeuppance and to just have her neck snapped by the hand of the person she was planning to kill was cathartic, in my opinion. I really like this fight because it's not strictly a fight. It is a moment that is a challenge. It's a challenge fight, if you will. It's not necessarily you have to kill the person. You actually have to do the opposite. You have to get someone else to do it. And I thought that was badass. At number 5, we have Vox Machina versus Vecna. Technically, this is round 2. Although the first time they came across Vecna, it was a mild stomp in his direction. He was able to just destroy them, literally disintegrating Vax. But overall, I love this second fight, their rematch. It's on top of a fucking moving undead Earth Titan, which is badass. It's in the same location as their last fight, just now it's a little bit destroyed, which I think is a really cool, unique way to show the different phase of the battlefield. And Vecna had been ascended at this point, so he's a god. They had to use the divine trammels to be able to defeat him, which I thought was a really cool thing. It wasn't, again, about getting him down to no hit points. It was about putting these trammels into him to be able to seal him properly, which I thought was really fun. On top of that, we had some really cool moments. Obviously, one of the most iconic moments of Scanlan using a ninth level counterspell, meaning he wouldn't be able to do anything to save Vax later in the day when the Raven Queen finally came to claim him for herself. On top of that, we also had some really cool moments where some guests would show up. First of all, we had Cash and Zara, who were characters who showed up through the entirety of Campaign 1. And then on top of that, you would get Archon, which would end up with one of the most insane moments of any campaign so far that has never been, in my opinion, never quite been replicated. It's been close with how how evil this was and how backstabby it was. honestly just a really fun moment where he steals the hand of Vecna and then just teleports out. Really dope, really fun moment. And the shock on the players was really cool as well. I love this fight for a million reasons. Obviously, the Vecna fight in and of itself is really fun, but everything else that surrounds at the end of Campaign 1, the guest characters showing up, the betrayal that happens, just a lot of fun overall with this fight, and it's just a good time. It's filled with emotion, it's filled with success, it's filled with sadness. It's just so good. Such a fun fight. And the map is cool. In my opinion, this is one of the first times where I thought like the maps from Campaign 1 were starting to look like what it would look like later on in Campaign 2 and 3. In my opinion. I know some people might disagree with that. Some earlier ones from Campaign 1 did too. This one to me felt like some of the higher end stuff that we would see in Campaign 2 and 3. At number 4, I have the Mighty Nine versus Vakoto. I love the Rumble Cusp arc for a million reasons. It had a bunch of people who like lost their memories, and the party were starting to get messed with a little bit, and they constantly had to like greater restoration themselves so they could heal up properly and actually have their memories still. Items were being stolen from them without them knowing. It was just a lot of fun, and the characters they met were really cool. Vilya, Keyleth's mom, really cool reveal as well. Super fun ideas in this arc in total, and it came to a awesome climax with the Vakoto fight. The Vakoto fight was underwater, first of all, which they were allowed to breathe in because I'm pretty sure Fordcast breathed underwater. I forget exactly how they're able to do it, but it was really cool because they had like omnidirectional movement. It wasn't just on a flat plane. And most of the time, most people would be on a flat plane, but this time they'd be able to move around. And I love the idea of them changing their elevation so they're not in the way of each other, but they can still have direct line of sight so they don't hit each other with spells. I thought it was a really cool move to be able to have them float around in this water and attack Vakoto, the big creature that he was. And one of the coolest parts of the Vakoto fight was that he could like reflect and redirect magic. So if Caleb shot a fireball at him, Vakoto could throw it towards someone else. And I thought that was a really cool idea and something that I don't think we see too often, which is something I'm going to have to steal at one point in time for a boss fight in the future, because that's a badass idea, and it actually almost got Jester killed. The way that Caleb finished off the fight was firing a disintegrate ray at Vakoto, and had he been able to reflect it, Matt said he would have aimed it at Jester, who was probably looking the worst of the entire party, meaning Caleb, who had a crush on Jester at the time, would have fucking killed her. Just outright killed her dead. Because she would have been disintegrated. I don't think they would have had a powerful enough way to resurrect her at the time. So, luckily, that didn't happen. And the stress you felt from, the idea that this thing could reflect magic on other people was intense, because a disintegrate ray could probably kill most of the party at that point in time of the fight. But to specifically aim it at Jester would have been a, terrible move, because that would have hurt me personally. But overall, this fight's dope. It's got a lot of really cool moments to it where they're able to make a projection of an astral dreadnought to scare the piss out of Vakoto. Some people ended up in the astral plane for a while because they were trying to banish Vakoto for a minute, and it ended up bouncing off of him and onto other people, which is really funny. And then at the end of the fight, after he's dead, they get like an image of Cognoza, which I think is, the coolest arc ever. The whole Lucien Cognoza arc. So for me, seeing the beginnings of that here was awesome, and I love that shit. So much fun to have like a fight specifically. There were other things on Rumblecusp that sort of hinted at something else for Cognoza, but to have a fight specifically lead into the next arc was really well done and super fun. Map was dope. Omnidirectional movement's dope. Love this fight. Super fun. At number 3, I have the Bell's Hells versus Odahan Thu on the rematch on Rites. I think this fight is dope for a couple of reasons. First of all, the party was mildly spent after, doing some missions on Rites and blowing up a bunch of progress the Weavemind had made toward digging toward Pathos and stealing some information and a certain alien whose name I forget the moment I forget the name, but they took her from like the research lab and they were able to like get her all the way out here. So the party was mildly spent, and it was at a weird time because they weren't sure if Liliana was on their side or not after like a big explosion that killed off a lot of Rudisborn, and it really angered her because that would anger her when a Rudisborn would die and she was taking care of them. She wasn't aware if they were a part of it or not. It was just a really interesting time frame because we didn't know who was on whose side here for this fight. And then Liliana not showing up until afterwards was probably the best move, but we didn't know if she was going to show up to aid Odahan Thu at some point or if she was going to show up and like aid the party, which would have helped certain people survive. But overall, this fight's dope because of all that setup and then like what happens during the fight. The fight itself was sickening, because within like the first 2 turns of the fight, Chetney was dead. He was dead. He had to be revivified. He was dead. It was crazy how bad he was in that first like couple seconds of the fight. It was insane. And then after that, the focus became on removing a part of Odahan's kit. And even after losing that kit, she nearly wipes the floor with them. It comes down to a character having to make a sacrifice of blowing up like a fucking nuclear reaction in their chest to be able to kill this person. And according to Matt, it only barely killed her because she had just drank in like a supreme health potion just before this. She only barely died after a massive explosion that rendered one of the players permanently dead. This was an insane fight. The fact that she lost like a third of her kit and was still destroying the party without much issue. She was insanely broken, to the point where a lot of people actually think that she was too strong, and the fact that she might be like the most powerful thing that any party has ever come across, because she was disgusting. Imagine if she had her full kit, what she would have done to the rest of the party. It came down to them being able to rip that backpack off of her and destroying it so the shadows would go away. It was just overall really fun, and with the FCG sacrifice was like a central emotional piece of campaign 3, and honestly might be one of the most emotional moments for all of Critical Role, with how like, you know, extra context that we get later for Sam's exit from Critical Role for a little while. And, you know, just everything on top of that, this emotional moment, the badass fight that took place, finally killing Odahan Thu, who had been a thorn in the party's side for ages at this point. It was all very like cathartic and nicely wrapped up in this fight. And seeing the charred body of Odahan Thu after the explosion was just a cherry on top of everything, because she needed to die. At number 2, I have the Mighty Nine versus Trent Ikithon. I cannot describe to you how much I fucking hated Trent Ikithon during campaign 2. So to see a fight where they finally were able to like put him in his place was dope. This character had manipulated, brainwashed, and like destroyed the life of Caleb Widogast, and it was only right that they would eventually take him down. They would eventually defeat him. But here's the thing. What I like about this fight the most, first of all, the location is dope. We finally got to see a fight happen at the Blooming Grove, which is a location that I desperately love. It's Caduceus' home. It's a graveyard with like a little temple and their little shack of a house. I love this location. It's so much fun. And what was shitty about this is it was finally beginning to heal. They had finally begun the process of healing the Blooming Grove, and what happens? Trent Ikithon shows up and is now going to start wreaking havoc on this beautiful little graveyard home. How dare you, you motherfucker? Do you have to ruin one home? No, 2 apparently. Screw you, Trent Ikithon. And the party being able to like beat his ass was dope because they didn't kill him. They put like sovereign glue on his hands and an anti-magic cuff on him, which was badass. I love the fact that this fight didn't end with Trent dying. I love the fact that it ended with him like basically being screwed. He was no longer going to be able to do anything, because unless he had a wish spell, that sovereign glue was not coming off him. It was a badass moment, and eventually, yes, he would be released from his prison because of the whole Apogee Solstice, but it was still really nice to see this character who had been really gross and icky, like Trent Ikithon, right, as Jester would call him throughout all of campaign 2. It was really nice to see this character get his ass beat, and that's why this fight is so high, because it wasn't a hard fight. In fact, I'd say the fight that they had with him later on for a one-shot for the Echoes of the Solstice would be a harder fight. This fight was just so nice. First of all, Astrid switching sides midway through because she saw that like the writing was on the wall, and she was like, you know, realizing that she still had feelings for Caleb. She'd been realizing that a little bit sooner, but the fact that it finally came to a head here was really nice. And you know, Aidwolf was his name, not Beowulf. Aidwolf was over there as well, sort of not sure what to do with it, what he was doing. He did, I think, ultimately like end up siding with Trent, but like got knocked out. So luckily he didn't get killed off. But overall, actually, did he die? I don't know. I don't remember if he died or not. I can't remember because he never showed up again. So either way, the character, like having those characters here to aid Trent and then sort of change the tide as things weren't like going his way, and they're like, fuck it, we're going to join the other team, was just really fun and really cathartic. Seeing that all of these relationships that he had built and like all these people he had like messed with and destroyed over the years, it finally came back to bite him in the ass, and it was worthwhile. And eventually, like the words that Caduceus gave him, like, I hope you find someone who will miss you while you're gone one day, never came true, because Caduceus knew he was an asshole. And I just love that this fight happens at Caduceus' home, because it really just rubs it into Trent's face that Caduceus was always right about you. You're an asshole, Trent. Fuck you. I love this fight because it's so nice that he gets his ass beat. And at number 1, my campaign 2 is really showing. I have the Mighty Nine versus Lucien from episodes 139 and 140. I love this fight. First of all, just, again, a fight taking place across multiple episodes is just badass in and of itself. And this fight holds some of my favorite aspects from everything that I've talked about before in this list. It's emotional with the connection with Lucien and Mollymauk. It has some really fun moments where the party try to reach out to Mollymauk within Lucien, and it reduces his like legendary actions at some point, which is a brilliant move from Matt to be able to like, you know what, my players aren't actively trying to kill him in this moment. They're trying to like manipulate his soul, which I thought was really cool. And the way that they were able to like actually affect Lucien was really cool in that way. Also, a portion of this fight has like omnidirectional movement where they're like flying in like the skies because they're in the Cognoza ward, which is in the astral plane, which is really dope. Again, I mentioned the Cognoza ward. I love this shit. I think it's really cool. Cognoza as a city, the living city, is dope. And the fact that like Lucien is now the Notagon and he's like becoming the Neo Notagon, I believe is what it was called. It was just a super badass thing for him to like have, you know, he was in the Mollymauk body, and then that Mollymauk body would get like manipulated and changed, and the 9 eyes would like stick out and actually be able to like be a part of him. And he had like a cocoon-esque body at some point in the fight, and eventually it would take like this part would have 2 parts where he would transform yet again, and both of the minis were dope. They were really cool. One was him like really muscular, and he had like the 9 eyes on him, and then he had like bone-esque wings and the cocoon-like body because he was like going through a metamorphosis. I just love the design of Lucien during these fights. It's really badass and really cool. Also, big fan of the maps that they used. I'm a sucker for maps. So you got a cool map, you're going to have a dope fight. On top of that, there was just some really fun stuff that happens throughout this fight. You know, I believe this is the only time where both Jester and Caleb would die. And I think they both had to be revived at some point during this fight, which was, you know, interesting. I think that was the only time they would both die throughout the entirety of Campaign 2. And then on top of that, one of the best Travis moments of all time comes from this fight, because Jester gets hit by like a fireball and she's gonna go down, but then they realize that she's wearing the ring of fire resistance that Ford spent way too much money on, and he like gets all excited because she's resistant to fire, and he yells, "Saved my bitch." One of my favorite moments of all time. It's just so fucking funny. This fight is just awesome, and ending in the way that it does with them like putting Lucien down, and then, you know, Caduceus saying like put it back with divine intervention, and that's when we get Kingsley. Also a really fun moment to come out of this fight. Overall, this fight is badass. It's an emotional fight because they have an old ally that they're fighting for. They're trying to save him in some form or fashion, and they end up kind of doing it. You know, they have to stop Cognoza and Lucien from getting into the material plane, because that would be bad. That would be very, very, very bad if that ended up happening, which would have been cool to see realistically, but they were able to stop him. And just overall, the catharsis of finally beating this person who they had been playing like a cat and mouse game with, because throughout this entire arc, they were like running with him a little bit. There was literally a portion of time, and it was actually a fight I considered putting on this list, where the Tomb Takers and the Mighty Nine were rolling together, and eventually they sort of came to blows. And it was really fun watching this cat and mouse, like, when will this eventually kick off? And it did, and it was really fun. So for them to have finally been able to defeat this person who had been a pain in their ass for a little while, who just so happened to also be wearing their friend's face, very cathartic moment after finally being able to do it all. It was just super fun to watch, super entertaining. I think this fight is a fight that I would be able to go back and just watch without any context and still enjoy. It's probably like one of the only fights in Critical Role where you could watch it without the context, and it's just an amazing fight. Love this fight. Probably the best send-off of any fight in like any camp. Technically, Trent would happen after this, but this was the true climax of Campaign 2, and it was worth every second of it. So there you have it, my favorite boss fights, or as my title would call it, the best boss fights in Critical Role ever, because, you know, these are the best boss fights. I don't care what you think. They're amazing. And yes, my Campaign 2 loving ass is showing. I don't care. Campaign 2 is the best. It had some of the best fights. Simple as that. Anyway, let me know what your top 10 favorite fights are in Critical Role. You know, I would say, you know, include like Age of Umber and stuff like that. But realistically, let's just try to stick to Exandria when we talk about our top 10 fights, because we're now entering a new era of Critical Role where we're going to start like looking at other stuff, because we're going to be in a new world for Campaign 4. So I think we can start being like, you know, categorizing stuff between Exandria and whatever the new stuff's going to be. And Age of Armor could probably fit in the new stuff because realistically it is. So let me know what your top 10 Exandrian boss fights are from Critical Role. And yeah, I'll see you guys on Friday for whatever video I make next. Peace.